Good morning, beautiful people. Welcome to another episode of Kiko's Freethinkers Forum. This is episode 58, and I'm in the presence of a very special guest. His name is Mr. Lorenzo Kom'boa Ervin, and he is originally from Chattanooga, Tennessee. Currently resides there still, does a lot of local activism work. I found out about Mr. Ervin because he published a book originally in 1979 entitled Anarchism and the Black Revolution. We're going to be talking about Anarchism and the Black Revolution, the definitive edition, which is actually a fourth edition published by Pluto Press. And he was also affiliated with SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and the Black Panther Party. This is honestly, I was telling him off air, we could do an episode just on his backstory. But we will cover a lot about Mr. Ervin's backstory and into the book Anarchism and the Black Revolution, the fourth edition, the definitive edition. But I just want to say welcome to the show, and we appreciate you accepting our invitation.
Well, thank you for having me here.
Yes, I was delighted when we were able to talk and we discussed, how this would work as far as the interview and just the content and everything. And I'm excited because we've talked about anarchism on the forum before. So I encourage my listeners to go back and look at all the archives of Kiko's Freethinkers Forum. But this is going to be a very special episode because this is quite a dense book. It's simplistic in ways as far as a presentation to a larger audience, but it also delves into very specific terminologies and stuff too. So I think the book connects to various audiences and the writing style itself. And like I said, your backstory, the way it was presented in the book, it really brings everything full force when you read the book together. So I think we're going to have a great conversation. This episode 58. Small advertisement before we start. The forum is really growing. This is a 75 country outreach forum currently. So we have quite an international presence. About a third of our audience live outside of the United States, which is appropriate because a lot of the content we talk about isn't just domestic, but it's also international in scope. And Mr. Ervin's book is no exception to that. So I just want to say thank you to the listeners and viewers. Subscribe and like Kiko's Freethinkers Forum, especially on our YouTube channel. But you can also find us on any of your podcasting platforms of choice. I want to open the floor up to Mr. Ervin and ask him, can you give the audience a sense of your backstory, like how you grew up in Chattanooga, Tennessee? And you can spend as much time as you need because I think it's so relevant.
Well, I grew up in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I was born in 1947, and my mother was a domestic for rich white folks, and my dad was I guess you'd say a chauffeur or a driver, and not for the same white folks, but for some other white folks. But at any rate, so I was raised, at those days you had the nuclear family, the extended family, and especially the Black community. And my uncle and my other relatives, my cousin, and all this, we all were in one house basically. And through the early 1960s, first when I was 5 years old. Racists came and burned our house down when we were living on the grounds of a Catholic church, a Catholic school. They came and burned the house down. They didn't want us over there. My uncle worked at that school. He was a janitor there, and they didn't like the fact we were living on the grounds. So some racists came and burned it down. We had to move out. And we eventually moved from the east side of town, which was just starting to turn black. And so we moved in a house there. And I don't know, for maybe 30 or 40 years, I lived there in that house. And of course, later on, the police burned the house down to keep me from coming back when I moved out of town with my wife. That's a story in and of itself.
Oh, yeah.
But anyway, I was raised up in Chattanooga. But at this time, the civil rights movement had just broken out. I think it was 57, 58, something like this. And I first started hearing about it as a kid. And my mother loved the NAACP so much she had me join it. Not volunteer to join it. She just signed me up for it. And so as a youth, I was in the NAACP. Now they didn't do anything. I mean, the NAACP, they were really just a businessman's organization, black business organization. That's all they really cared about. And in fact, the guy who's over the one school, high school there, one black high school, he turned out to be a pivotal figure in trying to stop the protest movement when it broke out in 1960. I wasn't a high school student myself, but my cousin was. He was there, and he and some others on their own decided that they would have a protest in Chattanooga. And so they marched from the high school, which was right on the outskirts of the downtown area, and they marched to and through the downtown area, and they went into various department stores and demanded that they be served. Of course, the whites weren't going to serve them. It was legally at the time of racial segregation, so they felt like they weren't going to serve with people. So the people just sat down. Students just came in there and sat down, right? And then the cops came. A fight broke out. First of all, the white racist kids and Klansmen and whoever came and tried to spit on people and hit people on the head and all this kind of stuff. So this particular instance, there was no preacher or something or other telling them not to fight back, and so they jumped up and started fighting these racists back, and they drove them out of there. When they ran them out of the department store, I think it was a Cress's department store. As they ran them out of that department store, then the police came and they started to arrest them, harass them and arrest them. And myself and young kids like myself, and also people in the community started to march from the center of the black community, which was also downtown, and started to march in large numbers, in fact, to come into the downtown area to protect the students. And we were hit with high pressure water hoses, which was years before what happened in Birmingham, which got tremendous attention. But this was years before that. They hit us with high pressure water hoses. They let loose police dogs on us, all kinds of stuff to stop us from getting to the center of the city. And so this thing was a battle royale, you might say, and it turned out to be a citywide protest. It was heavy. It had nothing like that had happened there before. And that was the event that I point to, which really radicalized me. I'd never seen black people stand up and do anything to fight back against racism. You know what I'm saying? And my family was just, a typical family. We weren't producing radicals or anything, so we didn't think we were. And my mother didn't want me to go down there, but hey, I'm just going. I'm a kid. What do you think? All this excitement going on, I'm not going to be down there. So a bunch of us just pushed our way all the way through from the black community down to downtown to try to get to the downtown area. And so we ran into this wall of police, there's police and police dogs and water hoses and what have you. And this went on for days. I mean, this kind of stuff. Because the students that were arrested were quickly replaced by others, and this kept on going for quite a time. And the mayor and the other white racist officials didn't quite know what to do about it, and so they wound up making some kind of concessions. And when they made the concessions, you could eat downtown there, and other things, and a lot of the vestiges, the symbols of segregation were destroyed, just in that protest. And a number of us, who saw this were radicalized by it, something that lasted with us for the rest of our lives. I guess at that moment I knew what it is I wanted to do. I wanted to be an activist, and I didn't even know what the word meant at that time. But of course, it just stayed with me that we could fight back, we could win. and we can change the world. I mean, I just started thinking about that feverishly for years and years and years. And then after that was over, I went back to school and so forth because, my parents were not going to let me become a traveling organizer. They were going to, make sure I finished my education and so forth. And so I did, but I continued to try to rally the youth, even in the grade school and the junior schools and all this stuff, tried to rally them and kept that going until I got into high school. But the officials had broken up the protests and they'd driven people out of the schools, might have driven some people even out of the city. And we weren't able to repeat that, although, other protests took place. There it wasn't the same. Guy got older, and eventually I got, drafted into the military against my will and so forth. I became an anti-war activist. I was against the war early, in very early stages. And again, I was looking at things that were happening. The group that formed in 1960 had gone on to become an anti-war movement, a black anti-war movement, as well as a civil rights organization. And I'm talking about the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And, although I couldn't join it at that time, I was influenced by it to a great degree. It was organizing all over the South. It was changing people's living conditions. It was changing the power structure that was against people, the segregated power structure. And it wasn't just Dr. King. In fact, it was a new movement by 1960. People don't understand that. The Birmingham bus boycott produced Dr. King and the adult leadership and so forth. But by 1960, when the three young brothers went into, I think it was Greensboro, North Carolina, and had their city in there, that sparked a whole new wave of protests, which was led by youth and wasn't under the control of the black pastors and all these other fairly conservative elements. And so, a whole new stage of activism came on the set. And eventually, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee comes along, made of youth, and they're much more militant than these, conservative pastors and so forth. And they call for much more, dynamic kinds of protest movements and stuff. Well, as I said, I couldn't join right then. I was still too young. I was 10 years old when all this stuff happened. And but it made an indelible mark on me. You know what I'm saying? And I started looking into this kind of stuff for years to come. So finally, I wound up going into the service when I turned so-called legal age. Although in my case, I was 17, and they took me into the service. And I knew I was on my way to Vietnam. And when I got into the military, I found elements in there, black youth who were opposed to the war, was influenced. By that time, Black Power was coming on the scene. It was like 1965 when I went to service. And I think Black Power became a national protest movement by then. And there again, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was an essential part of the Black Power movement. It was the seedbed of it. And so a lot of young people were influenced by it. And this was a young people's movement. The Black Power movement was, as opposed to, the black pastors and so forth in the early stages. And all of this stuff had a deep and lasting impression on me. And by the time I went into the military, I was totally opposed to the war. And I refused to go to Vietnam, refused to report. And I was arrested and so forth. And they had me on some base in Germany. And this was at a time when they were going to, the draft was so unpopular that they had started what they call a levy. And this levy was they would take troops from France, Germany, South Korea, and other places where they had, where the troops were, and they would take those troops and send them to Vietnam. And so we started a protest campaign against it while I was there in Germany. And we had people leave and go AWOL or desert the military entirely, and they would go to some southern, some countries in, I think one of them was Sweden and Denmark, and I can't remember but there were several Scandinavian countries that were a source of protection. People went there and just dropped out of the military completely. And I don't know. I think that when they found out this was going on, with military intelligence and the police, German police and German intelligence found out that this was going on and I was involved in it, and it wasn't just me. There were others in other cities in Germany and other places where the troops were located. And when they found out about this, I was arrested and taken to a military prison in Mannheim, Germany, which this prison used to be a concentration camp for the Nazis. Actually, it was a vicious place, and I was facing some serious charges. They wanted to charge me with treason at first, and of course that's a death penalty charge. You could lose your life like that. And but the anti-war movement in Germany, some contacts I had made during the time I'd been there, rallied around me, and they let people know in other countries, including the United States, let them know I was being held and facing these charges and all this stuff. And I did serve some time in the prison there, waiting for trial. But when I got to the actual trial, it was so much protest, people in the streets and around this prison facility, this infamous prison facility in Mannheim, Germany, that they were forced to drop the heaviest charges and to just dismiss me from the service. And they couldn't even give me a dishonorable discharge, which is like a blacklist. They couldn't even give me that. But they pushed me out of the service, said I was too dangerous and I was turning the troops against the higher brass and so forth. And so I was pushed out. Came home, and this when I started working with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and later the Black Panther Party for a brief period when they were allied or in a merger. Some people say it's a merger, some people say it was an alliance, whatever. They were working together, and so in the early stages there, I started to sell the Black Panther newspaper when it came out, and that was not looked upon fondly by the white power structure and the cops and so forth. And I got beat up a lot and take the papers and throw them away and all this kind of stuff. They didn't always get a chance to do it, but sometimes this would happen. And I had to go to Atlanta to get the newspaper and bring it back to Chattanooga. And and this kind of harassment continued on. But then that was in '67, and then by '68, the assassination of Dr. King took place. There were rebellions all over the country, and even in the state of Tennessee, there were so-called riots, as they call them, as if it was a criminal act, But these rebellions took place, and one of the places it took place in was Chattanooga, and Memphis, and all the major cities. And after the rebellion took place, the attorney general and some of the other cops and other officials and cops as well had started some kind of what they call treasonous board. Supposedly they were going to find that, and they did make a finding that the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and the at that time it was the Black Panther Party they didn't have any chapters in Tennessee or the South at that time, but it was known that they were working together. That in point of fact, the leadership of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was drafted by the leadership of the Black Panther Party to help them build their movement. And so they found that this was treason. These were communist agitators and so forth and so on. And so they set up these Black Power grand juries, they call them, and to investigate you know, the organizers and activists in those movements and in others as well. And so I was eventually put in position. Well, one of my friends had been a so-called leader of the, you know, this faction that at the time of Dr. King's murder had protested the, you know, and become a leader in the campaign against what the cops and the racists were doing. And he was assassinated. He was shot and killed by the police. And that was my, you know, that was my cue to get out of Dodge and you know, and avoid what was, you know, the repression that was coming. You know, 68 and 69 were the years recognized as the repression of the Black struggle and of the anti-war movement and the New Left, as it was called in back in those days. And so I left first and just went to Atlanta and was, you know, living in Atlanta. And then I come to find out later that, in point of fact, the FBI was looking for me on some kind of warrant, unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. And so I tried to go underground, but you know, it really wasn't an underground, especially for black people. It wasn't really an underground. And so I knew I had to get out of the country. And so I hijacked a plane to Cuba. And some people think that that's an extraordinary act when you think about it and so forth and so on, but really it wasn't at the time. There were a number of these plane hijackings by various activists and other people for whatever reason to get out of the United States and to go and ask for political asylum. You know, I don't know that everybody was in my situation, but you know, that's what happened to me. And so I left. I hijacked a plane from Atlanta to Cuba and landed in Cuba. You know, and while I was there, unfortunately, there was a beef between the Cuban government and Eldridge Cleaver, and they were coming down on Black Panthers at that time. You know, if you were identified as being a Black Panther, you could be picked up, and many of us were picked up and put in jail and held there for quite some time. Some people were thrown, you know, like myself, were ultimately thrown out of the country. Others were kept in that prison system. I don't know, indefinitely, I guess. You know, one person has written a book about it. He's an ex-Black Panther, William Lee Brent, and he wrote a book called Long Time Gone. He talks about his whole period while he was, you know, in the prison system, how he got locked up, and talked about how he worked in the fields and all kinds of stuff. You know, he explained a lot of things. And even myself, I didn't fully understand at the time what was going on. Anyway, they sent me out of there. They sent me from Cuba, and they told me that I'd be going to a base in Africa. I assumed that they were talking about at that time sending me to where Eldridge Cleaver was in Algeria. But no, it turned out that they just wanted to get me out of the country. They shipped me to Prague, Czechoslovakia. And this was weird. I mean, in a sense, because one, I didn't know anything about Prague, Czechoslovakia, and in 1969, it was 1 year after the Soviet Union, as it existed then, and the Warsaw Pact had invaded Czechoslovakia, because they said they were going over to the west. The country was going over to the west. They were selling out, so they invaded and had it under military occupation at that time. And so I'm there, and all this stuff is going on, and you know, it was a strange situation where you're in a country, everybody's, you know, the majority of people are white and Europeans, and you are there, and you know, you are confronted with a situation, you don't know what's going on, and you know, this kind of state socialism. I had never, you know, you hear about stuff like this, but I'd never seen it. And you know, you come up in the United States back in those days, you know, the anti-communist propaganda was overwhelming, you know. And so, but I was able to see for myself the good and the bad, you know. And you know, Czechoslovakia and other countries at that time, Eastern European countries, were under the control, of the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union itself, they were authoritarian socialist societies. People talk about socialism. Oh, socialism is wonderful. I'm not an anti-communist or anti-socialist, but state socialism, where you got bureaucrats over you and a secret police and all that ain't so wonderful. That ain't so wonderful. And and even though I was out of the country, and at that point at least, they weren't able to get to me. Uh, I had a feeling of unease that this ain't gonna turn out too good, and it didn't. I stayed there several months, but and everything, and the authorities didn't know where I was. Back in Chattanooga, they were harassing my friends and harassing anybody, even my family, to make them tell the FBI where I was. But eventually, the way I got ratted out was actually the Cubans themselves, and the Czech government actually set me up so that the consular officials and their security in particular could arrest me, but could grab me when a legal arrest, could just grab me. And that's what they did. They took me to the American consulate there at that time. And they were going to try to just bring me back, just, illegally. There was no legal process or anything they were going to go to. They were just going to grab me, put me on a plane, and bring me back. And I escaped out of there. It wasn't a secure facility, like a prison or something. It was a consulate, facility. And I managed to get into an area and escape, through a side door. And when I went through the side door, and they realized I'd gotten out of there, they tried to run after me. And that wasn't gonna happen. I used to run track. Those days, there's no way they could catch me. And I shot through there and jumped on the train and so forth and got away. And then eventually I made contact with this African students group that had been helping me. And so they said, well, we're going to get you. We're going to get you to Africa, and we're going to get you out of the city first. Get you to East Germany, Berlin, East Berlin. And I know this sounds like a spy story, and in many ways, I don't know. But anyway, they got me to East Berlin, and when I got to East Berlin, I was there for a while, but I was detected. And eventually they came in, rolled in on me one night, drugged me, which is their method, drugged me, and they just smuggled me across what they call the 4K zone, which was this zone which um, divided East from West, East Germany from West Germany, East Berlin particularly. And so they brought me over to a military base, military intelligence base, and they started questioning me, eventually, using physical torture to try to get information. And they couldn't get any information, but what happened is the FBI knew about it, me being arrested, and they started asking the State Department, why isn't this guy brought back into our custody? What do we have to do to get him? And so they started pressuring him, and then they realized that they'd have to send me back. So they got some people and some of the security people to put me on a plane and bring me back to New York City. And I was there in New York City until somebody dealt with my case legally. Now I was facing the death penalty at that time. Aircraft piracy was a death penalty charge, and that's my wife. And it was a dangerous situation. It was a dangerous time for me. I was like 20 years old, and I'm facing either prison the rest of my life, or in their case, they wanted to put me before a hanging judge in Georgia, and I could be sentenced to death. And so that was a predicament for me. And the only reason when I went back to Georgia that I wasn't sentenced to death was, for one, I met a political prisoner, Martin Sostre, who became my mentor and everything. And that's the person who first explained anarchism to me, which I wasn't sympathetic to at all, because it was just some wild white boys and crazy people, it seemed like to me, and they weren't doing anything, had nothing to do with the black struggle at all. So I just dismissed them. But I met him, and he was an anarchist, and he black Puerto Rican, and he's also probably at that time the best known political prisoner in the world, 69. And I used to meet him every day, and we'd have political education while we were having lunch, And he was also, like I said, a jailhouse lawyer. He was there because he was suing the state of New York for violating the rights of prisoners. And so he told me a strategy that I could use to defeat the death penalty portion of my case. And so, he told me to go into court to tell them that I wanted to testify, that I'd been tortured, tell them what the American government had been doing in Germany and in other countries and so on and so on, and create a international incident, because the German authorities were furious that someone had been on their territory and was kidnapped and taken out. And so I told the judge I was going to talk about this. I was going to go to the news media with it and so on and so on. And he hurried up and got me into a room, and they all agreed that they would remove the death penalty portion of the case if I would go back to Georgia. I had to go. I mean, this was a deportation hearing, so I had to go, but I didn't have to go down there in fear of my life. And so this brother Martin Sostre, who became, like I said, my political mentor, used to teach me all about anarchism every day. And coming from him, a black person, he said that this is not just an ideology for white people. He said it may be majority white at this moment, but it's people all over the world have been part of this movement, and even had cultures that preceded the European use of anarchism. Anyway, he talked about that. The idea of stateless socialism actually goes back further than just the Marxist concepts alone of Marxism-Leninism. That was one of the things that I found out, which I had no idea about. I had no idea at all, because you don't hear that kind of discussion in the American media or anything now. In the media now or back then. And certainly anti-communism was a mechanism for the American government to hold on to power and to keep a hostile political dynamic with the Russian government. And they continue to do that up to this very day. And I'm just blurting on here, brother. I'm not giving you the opportunity to ask questions.
No, this is absolutely perfect. That was kind of the idea, to sort of start with your backstory, because again, it's mesmerizing, it's intriguing, it's sad, it's eye-opening at the same time. And I think that 30 minutes or so was a good opening for the audience to get an idea of who you are and what you've been through. So no, I was enjoying every second of it. But I did have a question in response to something you just said about, because you answered my questions that I was going to ask about Martin Sostre. I actually got a few questions about him and who influenced him as far as his anarchy. How did he get introduced to it? But I was curious, what you were describing towards the end about, you made a comment about a stateless society before Marx. I thought about before we interviewed, I thought about quilombismo. I don't know if you're familiar with quilombos in Brazil. They were basically the resistant communities. A lot of the blacks had to go into the jungle and escape from the colonizers and the enslavers. And so they created these communities deep in the jungle to where they self-sustain themselves. And this is before Brazil was even a country. This was like, we're talking about the 1500s, like the late 1500s. So there is a history in different continents of these societies existing.
Yeah, I was actually told about that some years ago. I wasn't aware of it at first, and there's been a lot of instances where um, peoples of color, under one historical circumstance or another, like you say, this resistance to slavery, which occurred really all over the Caribbean, and they had created these maroon societies, as they call them, and of course, I've got my fellow comrade and friend Modibo Kadali, well-known radical black professor, among other things, and he has written extensively on that. The Maroons and also the dual power institutions and so forth that was done by the Africans and African slaves, were ex-slaves because they ran away, and built a new life for themselves. And so, yeah, that is important to understand that. Otherwise, we'll be forever thinking that it was just some Europeans and somewhere in Europe, and they did this and they did that, and not understanding that there was actually a stage preceding that. And the whole of human history, according to Modibo, the whole of human history has examples of dual power and statelessness and so forth. And it's just that things came together in a strong European state when they, built certain types of societies uh, that place emphasis on authority and on leaders and so forth. Those things have predominated, or they have dominated the imagination of people in this period. And so that's one of the reasons why a lot of people don't think that there's an alternative to living a certain way, a certain kind of society like what we're in now, which is, it's an empire, but it's also a certain kind of a nation state that has a long period of oppression of black people. Both those who were in slavery and those who came out of slavery, had to suffer the same conditions. And so, yeah, I did know that. I did know that. Martin Sostre was an important historical figure. He talked about those things, and being around him was a daily education, actually. And he kept pointing out to me that anarchism is not just something for white academics or some privileged white people who decide to go away from the status society or something, or from the major culture. He says that it's an international, it's universal political theory and method of struggle, and people from all over the world can use it and have used it. It's just that they don't want to recognize, the Europeans don't want to recognize that there have been others that have played a role in contributing to, anarchist principles, what we're calling anarchism, principles and so forth. And of course, anarchism, since we're going to get to this, itself is just a form of socialism. It's the other side of state socialism. We know about state socialism because that's what has been dominant, or had been dominant, through the Soviet Union and so forth, and the rise of that kind of revolutionary socialism, as it called itself then. We know about these things, and we can see the years that it was in power, and we can see the collapse and where we are today. So there's been a worldwide crisis in socialist ideology. And there's people don't understand, or one of the things I tried to make clear in Anarchism and the Black Revolution when I first wrote it was that there are different kinds of socialism. There's a couple, if you want to say it that way, of state socialist models. One is obviously the kind that embraces a capitalist state. say, what you got, democratic socialism, they call it. And then, of course, you got the authoritarian regimes that were erected, starting with the Soviet Union, as it called itself then, the Soviet Union, and how all the countries that came out after it were in lockstep with that political model. That political model was the dominant political theory and practice in that period. And what happened to me was that I had been exposed to all of this stuff, through the Black Panther Party, through the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and through just radical activism in that period in the 1960s. I'd been exposed to it, and I had turned against it, to be quite honest. I don't mean that I just, went over to some right-wing stuff. I'm not saying that, but I learned that there had to be a better way. There had to be a better way. There had to be a new path paved, and it won't happen overnight, but it will happen, And so I've been on this road now. It's been a lonely road because there's been very few people that agreed with me, especially Black people. But it's like everything else. Truth will out, as they say, the truth of something, the truth of a situation, the truth of an ideology, the truth of a form of struggle. All of these things will eventually will out. And that's not to say that my experiences as an anarchist or within the European anarchist movement has been a good one. It hasn't. I've had to fight all the way. Every step of the way, I've had to fight what I call an internal racism, a kind of anti-Blackness and all that. I had to fight all that, and eventually managed to create a Black anarchist federation back in '94, I think it was, in Atlanta, Georgia. The Black Autonomy Federation, and it stayed in existence a long time, considering all that has been erected against it. But these things are important. I mean, we're getting to the stage. I think most of the people now in the movement knows that a Black anarchism is coming, and that this Black anarchism is going to not only shake all political theory, but it's also going to shake the world in terms of its ability to struggle and to incorporate the struggles of people who are colonized, or neo-colonialism in this period, but colonized peoples, as well as those of us in various countries, European countries who live there and have built a long-term residence, you know what I'm saying, over the years, because there's a large Black population, has always been in the UK and even in France and everywhere else. Now it's really everywhere. But the conditions that people are having to live under, we'll have to struggle against that. We'll have to struggle against it. And in our struggle against it, I think, will manage to transform those societies as well. We will be able to discard all forms of neocolonialism and capitalist oppression and any other type of oppression, especially with statist oppression. So
I had a question based, and by the way, I appreciate you going into that. We're in sync. We're in sync with Lorenzo when it comes, because I was going to ask you about the three types of socialism, the three major types of socialism. You already documented those: libertarian, authoritarian, democratic socialism. There's a rift between Marxist Leninists and anarchists in general. I want to know from a black anarchist perspective, what is that major point of contention between those two groups, and where would you say a Black anarchist perspective would differ from just the overall anarchist communities?
Well, from my standpoint, and when I first wrote Anarchism and the Black Revolution, it was because it was at a time when there was, massive Black resistance in the United States and in every other country. The Black Power movement was an international movement. A lot of people don't really realize that, but it was. And so when I wrote Anarchism, the Black Revolution, it was because the anarchist movement in the United States and Europe and everywhere else simply didn't pay any attention to this struggle. They would see it, they, and so forth, but they didn't unite with it. They didn't support it, and so forth. Is what I'm saying. And so I wrote I first wrote Anarchism, the Black Revolution to point that out, and then to start giving a voice to those who were like me and like Martin Sustry, that I thought, and start encouraging the rising of a Black anarchist tendency. Black anarchism is going to be fundamentally different from, what we'll call white anarchism or whatever you want to, European anarchism. It's going to be fundamentally different in the sense that, one, it has a class politics that is linked to the street, has to have it. I can't say everybody in whatever group, every group is going to have, but from my perspective, it's always been about building a movement to, for the poor, for against the capitalist class, against the bosses, that people will have a way of using anarchism as a model to fight against the status quo, and when I first went into anarchism, I became a anarcho-syndicalist because I believed in a radical labor perspective, working class perspective. That was one of the things I united with. And I can't necessarily say I'm an anarcho-syndicalist today, but I am certainly still sympathetic to that perspective of the poor. Those on the bottom have got to rise up against those on top. Now, a lot of the historical white anarchists have said the same thing to some degree, but for the most part, and especially in the United States and a lot of other Western countries, they have instead sort of gone into this thing of an intellectual position, as opposed to a radical political position where we're going to actually fight to create a new society. Now, people give lip service to all of that, but they weren't going to Africa to see that, to help the people in Africa fight against colonial rule. They weren't reaching down for really poor people who are on the bottom and lifting them up and fighting the bosses in that sense. They were, they might say that they supported the white working people and so forth and so on, but the reality was that most of these forces were, some of them were bourgeoisie and from the bourgeoisie, and some of them were petite bourgeoisie, but that was the orientation, the political orientation. And so I think that if Black anarchism is going to accomplish anything or stand for anything, it will have to take a revolutionary perspective based on the actual material conditions of Black people and of the working class as a whole. But it'll have to be more of a movement that tries to transform the whole of society and level the social conditioning for everybody, social conditions for everybody. It has to dismantle the entire status system. That goes without saying to some extent, but it also has to dismantle the economic and political structure. Some people think that that the answer, if you can't have a revolution that sort of is to turn to electoral politics. And all electoral politics is just another way that the rich control the people. That's all it is. And there's complicated things involved with that, in the sense that I don't believe in electoral politics, but I think in terms of people, the working class should have the right to vote. The right to vote is different from who you're voting for and the political arrangements and so forth. Whatever form we can, I've been in movements where we fought against, you know, the thing to keep black people from having the right to vote. But that's a different thing than saying you got to vote for Biden or you got to vote for Obama or whatever. You know, that's a different kind of movement. I think, in fact, that any so-called electoral power should be in the hands of the people with a a dual power against City Hall and the rest of the government apparatus, but also in terms of creating a urban, I'm going to call it a assembly, radical assembly, in terms of that, and you know, keep the politicians out of it, period, and keep politics, period, conservative politics out of it. I think that we need to, you know, those are practical things. You know, people talk about utopia. You know, oh, it's all utopia. Well, I always thought about it in terms of what I call practopia.
Yes.
There's a society we're trying to create that has a practical program to achieve it, and to see that people can live a certain way. You know what I'm saying? A new kind of society. That's practical. It may be utopian in the sense that it's talking about doing away with the system that exists now and building something new. But every movement and every idea, at one time or another, people thought it was just impossible. We should always make impossible demands. Even the idea of civil rights and destroying the segregationist system in the 50s until the movement came on the set, nobody believed it was possible. They thought we were all going to get killed or you know, put in prison or whatever. You know what I'm saying? They never considered the effect of a movement. A movement comes along to change social reality. That's what it really is here to do, and also topple those in authority who have been oppressing the people. You know, that those two things alone are objectives of them. You can, you know, Black Panther Party had a 10-point plan, and then so other groups have had a plan and so forth. But everything has to revolve around serving the people. No movement or no organization should be in existence that doesn't have any plan at all for serving the people, and you know, and changing the reality of those of us at the bottom. We're part of the masses, as I'm always being told by my wife, who's an activist. We're part of the masses, and if you get to the stage where you think that organizers and activists are superior to or independent of the masses, then we get in serious trouble. Then we get authoritarian methods within our own movement, and that's what happened. That's happened before. You know, I even contend that's what happened to the Black Panther Party, but that's a whole different thing.
I had a question about, you brought up a neighborhood general assembly and anarchism in the Black Revolution. My question is, what is a neighborhood assembly, and is that city specific, or are there rural areas that have an infrastructure that makes that more of a reality?
No, I think right in the cities. I made the point to say call it urban, but no, I think right in the communities where we are, we can create dual power as a alternative to the ruling class's program and to the other elements, you know, allied with the ruling class. We can bring up a movement and a campaign that's in opposition to that, and we can also get a practice where people in the community come together and talk about social change, or even just whatever changes they want within their community, whatever kind of crisis they're facing. So I think that if you put that together with a, you know, even if it's a widespread or broad-based kind of theory, you have the practical aspect of organizing. You have it where people understand it, because you can't sell theories or programs to people that they don't understand or that they resist, you know. So you have to take I tell people all the time, they get hung up on this thing. Well, I'm an anarchist and we're this and we're that. I said, well, no, that's not it. You got it wrong. We are not better than the people. We are not even intellectually superior to the masses of people. It's just that we've got a series of ideas, we've got plans, and we have to be able to implement them. If we can't implement them, that just means that what your ideas were either fraudulent or or they were ahead of the people, or what have you, that they don't meet the needs of the people. And so we're part of the people. So we're dealing with how do we educate people? Popular education. I don't even use the term political education anymore. Popular education, so that they can see the conditions they're in, so that they can work with the organizers to prescribe a plan in opposition. And that's what I said, dual power. We want to create a situation where it ain't just the rich or the politicians dictating to the people. We're talking about the people in being in a position to combat what the government does, as well as come up with their own programs in opposition. So I think if we look at it like that, and organizers being respective of the masses of people, and being that they understand the communities they come from. That's why it's important. I said Black anarchism has to represent the communities they come from. Of course, we're going to be part of any broad, widespread event like a revolution that takes place in this country. The Black struggle is going to be part of it, probably the leaderships of it, whatever. But we have to understand our role as organizers and as revolutionaries is not to supersede the people. That's what's happened too much already in Russia. That's what's happened, and in other places, this whole vanguard mentality and organizing style has led to some very bad outcomes. We want to put power in the hands of the people themselves, not just in the hands of bureaucrats, not just in the hands of politicians, not just in the hands of pastors or whomever the elite force is we're talking about. Put it in the hands of ordinary people and see what they come up with. They certainly, ordinary people can't come up with anything worse than what is happening right now, because what's happening right now is just we're being led to slaughter, essentially. We're at a deep crisis worldwide, and we're going to have to stand up now. The ordinary person is going to have to stand up now or be destroyed when these fools destroy the planet. That's what's happening, in fact. I mean, there ain't no two ways of putting it. They're destroying the planet, and we have two choices. We can have, I call it libertarian socialism. We can have libertarian socialism, or we can have barbarism, fascism, and a corporate state. That's what we can have. We got our choice in one sense. Maybe we don't have a choice, but we're going to have to fight on one side or the other. And that's the moment in history we're at right now.
I have to say, when I read your book, it's one of the most introspective books I've read when you talk about politics in general, because first of all, most people probably previous to this interview didn't have the nuanced view of what anarchisms are, Black anarchy, considering, because I mean, you break everything down within anarchy. Is not a simplistic thing. There's very specific individualist, mutualist, collectivist. Like, you break down all these different categories: anarchist, communist, and this is information that's probably brand new to an audience that we're introducing this to today. But I said it's very introspective because it looks from within, and you definitely look in the mirror when you're writing this book, because you criticize the Black Panther Party, you criticize the shortcomings of these groups like Black Lives Matter, like how it was a great movement when it started, when the people were in control, but when the bureaucracy sort of took control, the heads of the organization, and then you get money involved with it, co-optation by the Democrats or whatever it is, you bring out the flaws within, I guess I would call it Black political thought in general, not even just anarchy, but just Black political thought in general. I thought that was one of the most significant observations of the book. And one thing in particular, I've had guests come on, and I'm not going to out them, but there's always this talk about community control, community control, community control, especially when you talk about community control of the police. And I think your work was the first one that sort of said, what exactly are we talking about when we talk about community control of the police? We need to have these sustainable communities for ourselves. We don't need community control of the police. And I had to step back for a second. I was like, wow, I've never considered that before. Could you tell the audience what you mean by how that wouldn't work, a community control of the police, based on your perspective?
Well, the ideas for community control of the police actually, as far as I know, came from the Black Panther Party when they were running an electoral campaign in the city of Berkeley, California, and they wanted to decentralize the police department and so forth. But the ideas later got to the point where they, the ideas of the local communities being able to control the police and their administration and so forth, and to stop shootings and so forth and so on. And that sounds like a good idea, and to a certain extent, you could say, oh, well, that's what we want. Well, the reality is, you always look at this from the standpoint of a balance of forces. And, if you leave the guns in the hands of the police and you leave the police system, the policing system in place, then you are responsible for whatever crimes they commit. Right now, it's the rich responsible for the crimes they commit, and the higher level officials. But we want to disband the police and to put power in the hands of the people themselves, and whatever resources go to the police agencies in terms of money, and so that money should go to the people themselves and to the communities, because that's what stops so-called crime anyway, is people having the ability to have resources to survive with, not only survive but to actually thrive and take their communities and turn them into livable institutions. That's what we want to do, and that's even while capitalism is still here. And so if we're talking about just community control of the police, we're effectively saying that we want the police to stay here indefinitely. And let me just say this, and people can dispute it all they want to, and that's fine. But the police were created as an institution to deal with slavery and controlling slaves who wanted to run away, who ran away from the slave plantation, or who created insurrections, or so-called slave rebellions and so forth. That's why they created the police, to protect the plantation. And of course, the richest plantation owner in the South was the head of what became the head of the Ku Klux Klan, Bedford Forrest. And so if we understand the origins of the police, is a racist origin and is designed to keep Black people particularly in enslavement and under the control of whatever power is around, whether it's capitalism or fascism or whatever. That's the role of the police. And so we, in my estimation, if we're building a new society, or even right now, if we're trying to control the police, I don't think we can control them by letting them keep guns and go in the community and shoot people. And that's what's happening. I mean, they've killed 35,000 people since 1980, when the federal government and the police agencies adopted racial profiling and paramilitary policing. They've killed 35,000 people, and that's just the ones that they reported to and said, yes, we killed them. Most of the police agencies, that was only about 13% of all police agencies. The rest of them refused to report to the government on how many people they've killed. I've been thinking for quite some time that we should have some sort of campaign to find out, to have organizers going around to find out how many people have been killed in their city. It's been 81 killed here in Chattanooga, Hamilton County. So many people have been killed that we started a body count. That's what we call it, body count. So yeah, I don't think there's any useful role for the police. And whatever contradictions exist in our community, and in fact in all communities or in the society generally, are caused by the government itself. Even the so-called gangs and wild youth, as they call them, and so forth, even that, and murderers and the rest of them, you can look at what has been happening, and you can say that this is actually the result of government policies, poverty, violence, disrupting and destroying families. All these things can be pointed to by the government and those in power, the elite. You can point directly to them. If you look at it like that, then you'll understand why are we protecting the police as an institution who refuse to stop killing Black people, particularly in disproportionate numbers, but people on the bottom and on the middle refuse to stop killing them, stop oppressing us. They're not going to do it voluntarily. We will have to seize their power, and take that away from them. And we will only be able to do that when there's a social revolution, ultimately. I mean, we can back them up, but seizing power away from them, not seizing power to establish a dictatorship. That's the worst thing that's happened up to this point. That's Marxist-Leninism. But we want to have it where we take power, the masses of people take power and put the power in the hands of the people themselves, not in the hands of politicians, as I say, or bureaucrats or cops or whatever. An authoritarian society is always one that justifies the worst atrocities, whether shooting down some kid, or a pregnant Black mother shot and killed by a cop because he said that she drove her car away or something or other. This kind of stuff is going on over and over and over. And as I said, the 35,000 people I've been quoted didn't come from me. It actually came from a British journal called The Lancet, and also the Guardian newspaper. They actually did the research, and they confronted American officials, and they said American officials were 17,000 short of the number of people actually killed between 1980 and I think it was 2020. So, these are lessons for us. We're not going to reform the police. In fact, you can't reform the police. Not really. You can't reform the police. What you have to understand is that the police are products of this system. Mm-hmm. They're products of this system, and the system itself will have to be changed.
Yes, and that was the most is very consistent too. Like if people read the book, then that rationale about defunding the police, all those things are reforms. And you're saying that because you're still upholding the same state as institution. So all you're doing is just it's a static almost, because you're not dismantling anything. The system is still intact the way it was still intended to be intact.
Right. I'll give you an example. I was with a group of people here in Chattanooga. It's been some years ago. That tried to fight police brutality, and started a movement off in here. And we couldn't resolve anything. We couldn't stop them from doing anything. And then one of the persons whose father had been murdered here by the police, she said, "Well, look, let's sue them. Let's sue these people." Well, the first time her family tried to sue, they were stopped and humiliated by the cops and their judge, saying that they had no right to even sue. That it was qualified immunity,
Mm-hmm.
and you can't resist the police, you can't fight the police. Of course, all of this was shown to be false in the 1960s, but never mind that. The point is really that we filed a lawsuit against the government. We got rid of the mayor, we got rid of the racist police commissioner, and got rid of all these old school elements that had been there for years. And what happened? They formed a new government here in Chattanooga. And the new government came in, and they've been killing black people ever since. They've killed 2 people this month. And, like I said, the last count that we had, there was about 81 people killed in this area. And that includes people who were beaten to death, people who were hung, people who were shot, all kind of ways, you know what I'm saying? But it's a reign of terror. And I would assume and bet you that in most cities in the country, you have that situation. In fact, I know for a fact you have it. Even the governor's aware of it now. That's why they're having these cities that they make the police adopt new policies, what they call them pattern and practice investigations and all this kind of stuff. Well, there again, you have to look at the situation and say, well, if you say that the police have a job and that people can't resolve their own problems in the society, then you have to have a militarized force. And you're going to always have these situations, especially with white cops that hate black people and who get jobs that have this power. They can provoke an incident. It might not be a legitimate incident at all. And the cop come in, and what they do is provoke an incident. They killed a 17-year-old boy here the other day. And basically what they did is they provoked an incident and then turned around and removed the family away from it and just turned around and shot him and killed him. So, and this is just over and over and over again in this country. Every day somebody's being killed by the police. And so the police have to be looked at as a death squad. We have to use political education to make people understand that the police are a death squad. I think somebody said that the highest form of death for black people is police shootings or police murder. And that is a denunciation that should set people to thinking. But I just don't think people are being confronted with things because they may not be told about stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one of the things that we have to do as organizers is not only just get out the street and fight it or whatever, but we also got to be able to educate people about what the true role of the police is and the true atrocities that they've committed in society already. A lot of people think it's just what they see on television, 2 or 3 cases, 5 cases, something like that, and they think that's all of it. And they don't realize that there's been a long train of abuses and a long train of murders. Bodies pile up already. Thousands of people have been killed. In fact, there's been more people killed. If you look at it in terms of American troops, there's been more people killed in the United States by the police that were killed in Iraq and Afghanistan, 2 recent wars. So what's happening is that there's a war being waged on black people and working class and poor people in this country. That's what's happening. That's really what's happening. And if you understand it like that, then you can see that it's not in your interest to continue to support an armed force who doesn't listen to anybody, that you have no ability to tell them what to do or stop them. It's in our interest to remove a group like that, to in point of fact have them dismantled.
So that towards the end of the book, at the very thick of the book, you talked about you dedicate a whole chapter to it about the hood. and you give some steps into establishing these communities. Is that the part you talked about, militia, black militia? So would that replace what we know as the police? Is that how it would be, basically the community policing itself?
Well, I won't say that that's what I'm talking about. I will say that, because we are a people that are in danger, we're in danger from being wiped out by racists coming into the community and shooting people down. You're starting to see that. You're going to see it more and more. Um, we need a force to push these people out and to respond to these people ourselves. And we also need the ability to control if there are social problems in the community, that people in the community deal with it. They don't have to shoot anybody down. They understand they've been in the same position, and they understand from living in the community that we can resolve a lot of differences ourselves. And even the government knows it. That's why they ever so often send out these so-called peace police or whatever you want to call them. And here in Chattanooga, they've given $1 million to the Nation of Islam to run a parallel police force in the black community.
Mm.
And they've given them surplus police cars and all this kind of stuff. And so the government knows that a lot of these things can be resolved without resorting to force. But whenever they come in our community, they come in with the intention of using force. In most situations that require it at all. But they come in, they're not protecting anyone. They're terrorizing the community. That's what's happening. But again, it's about a kind of organizers, activists have to give a certain kind of political education to people, not just be out to protest the crimes that they commit when they kill somebody, or
Mm-hmm.
waiting around for the next person to be killed. We need to be able to start transforming the conditions that allow these shootings to take place. We need to be, on a mass scale, educating people what all of this actually means and how much of it is actually going on, so that they don't think that somebody got shot a few weeks ago or whatever is the whole total of what's gone down. And it's been, like here in this city, there's been, like I said, over 80. I even pretend it's more than that, but we'll just say over 80. And in a city this size, this is smaller than Knoxville and smaller than a lot of other places. And to have these number of people being killed in these so-called violent incidents, it tells you that something is wrong socially. Mm-hmm. And that this government, this corrupt government, has created the conditions, and now they want to use the police to beat down people and to beat down communities in particular. So that's one of the things we have to say. That's why I said it's about organizing as far as we're concerned. It's about organizing, and it's about putting power in the hands of the people. And of course, we were talking about dual power, and we were talking about a number of things in terms of creating assemblies, for instance, urban assemblies. I would call it that. It was something I call it something that's in the book, but it's the same thing. And it's just a way of putting power in the hands of people so that they understand what is going on, and they understand that they can take independent action in opposition to those in authority, so that they don't have to accept the police coming in and doing this stuff. They don't have to accept a kind of budget of social money that's being stolen and given to the rich, and the black community don't get anything. That's why our communities are so poor. That's why our communities are so run down, because they don't take the money that they get from people's taxes and so forth. They don't take that money and do anything with it in our communities, except when they're running for office and want to say, I so and so, I put some sidewalks in. Yeah, well, sidewalks should have been in the first place. Mm-hmm. So I think organizers have to deal with this stuff on a daily basis, a day-to-day campaign. We got to train. I've been trying to train organizers so that they understand that their ideas are not just for fashion, or you can say that you're an intelligent person or something like that. It's just you've got this intellectual pursuit of something or other. You have to be able to make it have a practical effect in changing people's lives. And in our case, nobody in this period, and it really had been for years, has even looked at the Black community and tried to do anything for it, for the people. They've tried to profit from the people's misery, or they've tried to, push their career or something or other. But the people themselves have to be organized, trained, so that they can deal with their own circumstances, so they can be independent, autonomous. And when we get to that stage, or even when we start fighting for that stage, we will discover a new type of strength that we haven't seen in a long, long time. That's what the 60s was. The 60s was really about a type of Black autonomous movements that came, they weren't run by white people. Even Dr. King was, he was conservative compared to a lot of the groups back then. But he was not telling white folks to come and run his group, or that only a white man can do this, or it's a ridiculous proposition from the beginning. But it was much, a much deeper issue than that. I mean, that Black people who had been oppressed all these years and who'd been told that they couldn't do anything to, change their predicament and so forth, stood up at this historical period and took over their own destinies. And were it not for, the power of the United States government and military, we had a whole new political system and social system in this country. So we need to understand that. And so when you understand that, things are possible. A lot of people don't think things are possible, and they want you to believe that things are possible. It's just that we don't attempt it anymore, and we are neutralized. We are brainwashed to some extent. A word like that, I don't like to use that term that much because it can be seen to some as disrespectful. But the truth is, we are under control of someone else, and we have to break free of that. And we have to build new movements with new ideas. If you're going to try the same stuff over and over again, this is not the 1960s. People, there have been 25 attempts to create the Black Panther Party in the United States since this is 1986, I'm told. Since 1986, there have been 25 attempts to create the Black Panther Party over again, and every one of them failed. Every one of them failed, and it's because you can't just take, what do you call it, jailbreak out of history. You can't jailbreak out of history. That movement and that time created a fertile ground for a movement like that to come into existence. Now it's got to be a different kind of movement. It's got to have new ideas. It's got to recognize that the people who run the system have figured out all the tricks from the 60s and have now subverted all of that. And we need to therefore build a new kind of movement. And it has a different kind of accountability and strength based in the community itself, as opposed to some bureaucrat or some nonprofit organization, which is another thing they love to do, was get these nonprofit organizations that are funded by rich white foundations, and they send them in the Black community and other communities, and they, trick people. They just trick them. And so we got to go past that. Got to go past electoral politics. All is another thing that they tell people that you have to have. You want to get things changed in America, you got to vote. And we know for a fact that one is that we haven't voted in this country that long. I mean, this country's been around, 500 years? And I think maybe 100 years of all that history, Black people have been allowed to vote. And even when they've been allowed to vote, and most of the time we have been kept from voting through terrorism and whatever other means. And now they got the system rigged in such a way that even if you do vote, you put the wrong people in office, you strip yourself of any power, you strip your community of any ability to transform its conditions. and to demand resources, with the existing government. They should be, we should be forcing them to listen to us in terms of budgets and everything else. I mean, there's things we can do right now, I'm saying. Not to say when a revolution comes or whatever, that's another stage. We have to make it happen, but it's another stage. But meanwhile, what are we going to do? We got the largest prison population in the world, and most of them in there look like you and I. We got more people killed in the United States than have been killed in many foreign wars, and most of them look like you and I. And then poverty, the level of poverty in this country. There's poor white people. They always have been, but the majority of poor people, poverty is just about a black thing almost, or certainly a people of color thing. But that's what poverty is, and what they're doing to us and to our communities and so forth. So if we understand these kind of things, then we're able to organize on a level. It isn't just some ideology alone. I keep telling people that, young people, it ain't just you have an ideology. You have to make it apply to life, daily situations. You have to make it apply to structures of oppression, structures of repression. You have to make it. It's not just one issue, single issue campaign or something or other. It's a structure. People have talked about structural racism. Yeah, it is. It's been around like that for a long time. And, whether white folks recognize it or whether black middle class people or whatever, recognize it is another thing. But we have to make sure that someone recognizes in our community, working class people who are suffering from it, the victims of it, are in a position to fight back.
I was thinking about something the theme in the book, a lot of it revolves around Black autonomy, and there's a subsection entitled Black autonomy is not separatist. Now I know that this question, I think I may have an idea of where the answer would go, but I want my audience to kind of get these contextual perspectives, because a lot of my audience may not even know. You've explained the context really well, but a lot of my audience probably never knew what SNCC was going into the interview.
Yeah.
They never knew much about the Black Panther Party, the Nation of Islam, any of these organizations that we hear about in Black popular culture. But is there any overlap between Black nationalism and what you would propose, I guess, as a Black anarchist perspective? Is there any sort of commonality, or is it just completely incongruent?
That's a very good question. Very good. Well, let me just put it this way. There is obviously some understanding from what we call national liberation movements, and what we called the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, all these manifestations in terms of movements, and also organizations and figures like Malcolm X and all that. Certainly, there is some ties and overlap there. There's no question about it. But it's a question of method. Methods for how you struggle and what you struggle for. That's the difference. That's what I would love to see a Black anarchist tendency deal with and have an understanding about. I cannot say that the anarchist movement is in fact has ever been really aware of these things. I've been a solitary voice for a long time to explain these things to many people, not just the Black people, but to other peoples as well. I've been a solitary voice to explain why things are happening and things they see, Black rebellions or movements come along, various Black movements come along. Yeah, there are people who see this, who understand it. The problem is, and the reason why a movement comes along, a new movement, is because the contradiction is not resolved. The contradiction not resolved. That's why, you had the civil rights movement come into existence. There wasn't a Southern movement before them actually that was effective. And then after a certain stage in the civil rights movement, then, like I said before, in 1960, what became the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, first it was a sit-in movement. They came along and they transformed the entire civil rights movement, and they created a significant challenge to the civil rights movement, the older leadership and the adults. Then, in that same year, the 1960, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee came along, which is a very important organization in that it was a linchpin of one, a radical civil rights program from 60 to 65, something like that. Then in 65, Black Power came very much out of SNCC, at least the articulation of it came out of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Their leaders at that time became very well known, H. Rap Brown and, as he was known then, Stupid Carmichael. I'm using their old names. And they became known. And later, a little later, the Black Panther Party came into existence. And it was just a really fledgling group in at that time, fledgling group in 66 and 67. And when I got the newspaper and was selling it, nobody had hardly even heard of it. And most people thought that it was a bunch of crazy people. Even my wife, who joined the Black Panther Party, thought that these people were crazy. They're all going to get killed. And so they were raising, impossible demands, and and putting things in people's minds to think about in terms of armed self-defense, that the police was an enemy force, an invasion force in our communities being forced upon us. They were not there to protect us. They were being forced upon us and to oppress us, and they were the first ones that really talked about that. And so I was selling the Black Panther newspaper, and just by the act of selling the newspaper, I became a threat to the police and to the entire political establishment in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And, as I said, I was stopped and worked over sometime, and take the paper from me and throw them in the trash or whatever. And but it didn't discourage me. I just go back to get more, and sneak around and give them away if I couldn't sell them. Some people were afraid to buy them or didn't have the money. Poor people, back then, didn't have the money to buy it, so I just give it to them, And but I wanted them to have something to read. And even myself, when I first saw the paper and the stuff they were saying, I had to really think hard on this. I didn't know anything about any pigs or anything about fascists. If I heard of fascists, I always thought it was, Hitler or Mussolini or something. And so they were able to politically educate people through that newspaper for sure, but also through grassroots organizing. They were revolutionary community grassroots organizers, what they were. And they were able to use that and other programs, other social programs like, the well-known, free breakfast for children program, but there were others, free shoes, free clothing. Of course, one of the B's was the free medical care,
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, there were a lot of programs, something like 38 programs, I don't think any one person knew, including the founders, knew what all the programs were and who all the people were, and both in the Black Panther Party as well as all the volunteers. There were probably as many volunteers, maybe more than there were party members, to be quite honest. And so all this stuff was important because it shows possibilities. Once you see a possibility, you can't unthinking. You say, wow, they did this then, and so, they didn't have this and they didn't have that, and they were still able to use it. They were able to do that. Well, then, and I'm not just pointing to them as the only organization, because in that period there were all of these organizations. There was a whole movement. The Black Power movement was definitely an international youth movement, protest movement, as well as a movement reconstructing society and rebuilding the community. They were doing a lot of stuff. There's so many groups that it's impossible to know all of them. And I've discovered some years later, just by being in other cities, people talking to me. One guy was talking to me, talking about how he was in a group. And my wife has written a book, and I told her to rewrite it so more people could read it, on the Black Power movement, where she's got all these interviews of, all kinds of working class Black people or who were activists and might have been leaders in their local area, and you never heard of them, and so forth, except unless you lived there, And so that we can understand what kind of movement we need to build now. We need to build a broad-based movement. We don't need some movement around media superstars or something. That's what the government feeds us. Mm-hmm. They feed us Al Charlatan and they feed us Jesse Jackal and all these other people like that. All these other people, they feed us all those kind of people, and so on.
I'm very curious about your response to this. So when I'm reading the book, there's a section that talks about anarchists of color. And I talked with Jay Carrico. I think Jay's been on 3 times on the forum. And I asked Jay, what's this thing about Black people versus people of color? To me, I don't know how I feel about it, because I don't see it as the same per se, and I'm not implying that you see it as such, but I think language in this case could be somewhat problematic when you're talking about introducing this to like various audiences. But what do you mean by this Black versus people of color? Because I know people use it all the time, and maybe that's because it's been co-opted by so many other groups, and so the meaning that they apply to it may not be the meaning that you see in it. What's the importance and the relevance of that people of color versus Black, and how do you see it as far as a plane of oppression?
Well, one of the realities is whether it's society itself or whether it's in political tendencies, not just anarchism, but there is a certain kind of anti-Blackness. And, I wrote, I didn't put it in this version of Anarchism, the Black Revolution, but I'd written this article that talked about the progressive plantation and how Black people were treated, when, back in before and after, contiguous with Garvey movement, let's say that, around that time. And then you had the Communist Party, and you had all these white left groups that for years had created this mythology that Black people couldn't do anything but organize a so-called race movement, that we couldn't build a movement for the reconstruction of society or to rebuild or to build a new society. We couldn't do that. And so that was part of their mythology, their racist mythology. And so when I wrote this article, it was to challenge that, but to also talk about how all this stuff functioned. And so there had always been a certain amount of tension. We attempted to create, myself and others who were in the Black Autonomy Federation, attempted to create a parallel body of peoples of color and unite them with our group. And there were some white folks, and there were some other folks among the peoples of color who worked to sabotage that, and they sabotaged it. And ever since that time, there's been all this friction, not just between them and Black folks, or some of them these were Black folks, but and there's also a class thing. A lot of these people who are in the on this POC thing is they're middle class, they're well-to-do,
Mm-hmm.
and with Black autonomy was pretty much street people, street organizers and poor people and so forth, and working class people. You had some Black folks come out of the college because we recruited some people out of the Atlanta university complex, but still those people were grassroots folks. They weren't people who had wealth or something or other, and that's one of the contradictions with leftism is that some of these people are from very privileged circumstances, you know, and so there's that contradiction of the class and of race There is an attempt. There's been this idea within anarchism, which I fought for years, about everybody can create a tendency. Everybody can come along and create a tendency from wherever they are in the world, but not Black people, and especially not Black people in the United States. We're supposed to just blindly follow behind white radicals. And if we don't do that, we're labeled as splitters and troublemakers and blah, 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 and all that. So I've had to deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what my next book is about. I'm writing about that. And I temporarily called it Fear and Loathing of Black Anarchists or something like that. You know what I'm saying? Because that's what a lot of the content is about. It's about the fact that when I came along and was trying to, even just introduce Black people into the anarchist movement, there was so much opposition, so much hostility, and so much fear and suspicion, and that I had to deal with. And and time as went by, eventually I had to turn around and realize that I'm going to have to create something myself with Black people, because they're not going to bring Black people in and make them do anything. And when they did bring in Black people, some of these groups used them to attack me.
Mm-hmm.
So with all of this stuff going on, it's important to say the truth, and that is a Black tendency has to be an autonomous tendency. It can't be a question of joining a white tendency or working with a white tendency. We have to have a autonomous tendency or autonomous movement, because otherwise we'll be taking orders from others. We won't be able to decide what is in our best interest and the interest of our communities. We won't be able to decide as what tactics and so forth we want to take that might be anathema to some white people or something. We have to understand that it's extremely important that we do this, and also that puts us in a position to dictate the outcome with the anarchist movement as a whole. We'll be able to be in a position to have a strong voice to combat a lot of the racist garbage that has gone on in the anarchist movement. It's not a perfect situation, and I knew that going in. But I had some ideas and created some kind of ability to fight it. And I'm still fighting it to this day. But even though people are listening to me more now than they were then, the reality is, to me, the contradictions of the past cannot be just glossed over. They have to be dealt with and understood and destroyed wholesale. Otherwise, they'll come back again. And so there's going to be struggle between Black people and the so-called white movement to transform a lot of the things that are there that are ideologically distasteful or counter-revolutionary or whatever. It has to be attacked. It has to be dealing with some people even call it decolonizing anarchism. That's a discussion that's going on now, But I'd recognized that a long time ago. When I got to a certain stage, I said, we're going to have to build something of our own. And once we build it, of course, it was not a huge success, but it did enough so that right now in 2023, people are still talking about it and trying to figure out how to build something now. So whatever we did back then, it may have seemed that it didn't have any impact at all, but in point of fact, it laid out a trail. And that's the whole thing with a movement. That's why we talk about the 60s and all that. because it laid out a trail. It showed the possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's hard to do something that's you don't think you can do it yourself and nobody else thinks you can do it. It's hard to do it. But if you see someone has done it, and on whatever level they succeeded or didn't succeed, it inspires you then to say, well, we can do this and we can take it to another level. And that's what I'm trying to do in this period right now, in finishing up my life and finishing up my organizing and training.
You said a lot there, and it's appropriate that this is called Kiko's Freethinkers Forum, because everything that you've expressed up until this point sounds like anarchism encourages free thought more so than anything that I've been introduced to, like social, political, or anything to that sort. And I say that because I'm operating within this is a social media space, but it's been brought to my attention that a lot of people, and I take it as a huge compliment. A lot of my viewers have said, Kiko, I see this more as a public service than anything. Like it's more than just a podcast. And that makes me feel good knowing that people see it as more than just, and that's the point. It's supposed to be an educational forum. But to go to your point, I think if we spent even 10% of the amount of time that we spend talking about electoral politics and all this civility politics crap, there would be such a shift in mentality in people. But everyone is so stuck in their own electoral politics bubble. Even the people who say that they don't care about it, that's all it pretty much all their content is in line with that same superstructure. And you made a very good point about the white left and the black left. All these people identifying this way and that way. And I'm almost starting to think like, does this stuff even matter anymore? This identifying as being the left and but not really upholding like what that means exactly. Because like you say, you come back to a battle of the same superstructure. Like how can you be a black leftist within this space, not an anarchist space, but a black left space within this two-party, one-party system philosophy? You're always going to be pushed to the margins because the superstructure is dominated by the white bourgeoisie class. So even though you may be a breath of fresh air to them, you're still going to be pushed in a corner. And you're creating something that's very different. Like this is a space where we can be ourselves and we can be the maximalist that we want to be. And I think that's a very important point.
I think I think that, like I said, if we think from the standpoint of not facilitating our oppression, not facilitating the system to continue to take advantage of us, to empower themselves, to enrich themselves, and all this, while we continue to stay on the bottom. And if we ape what they do, if we do, try to turn around and look at what they do, even the ones who claim to be subverting it, wind up upholding the same system of oppression. There are people I know who were in the 60s, were radicals and revolutionaries and all this, and they've gotten my age, or they've gotten paid off and the money is good to them and whatever. And they feel that there's only one thing they can do, and that is to find a way to profit from what's happening now. There's no way we're going to overthrow this. There's no way things are going to change so drastically that you're going to have a revolutionary upsurge or whatever. Mm-hmm. That really was the thinking that killed off the 2020 rebellion against police brutality in this country. It subverted it because people decided what they wanted to do was to put it in the hands of politicians to make the changes instead of allowing the people themselves to be organized and build the kind of community power to fight back. If you can't fight back, then all you're doing is taking orders. Mm-hmm. All you're doing is taking blows. And so I think that for me, what I've been always saying, now people may be saying it as well now, but what I'd always said was that we needed to find a way to organize with people in communities, maybe your own community, where you are, or whatever. But we need to talk about how do we build structures and organizing style that takes us away from accepting reality, the reality we're living under, and building a new society. And that don't mean just making reforms. I mean, sometimes reforms are important, but they're not enough. They're just simply not enough. You have to deal with the fact that there are people and there is a system. And now, the most harmful thing that came about to refute the 60s was the erection of a mass prison system. And I'll give that as an example. A mass prison system, you've got now the shootings I told you about, 35,000 or more that in the United States of Black people primarily, but other peoples of color as well. And all of these things are refuting what happened in the 60s. They're all the things that people won and things that all the rights that people won and everything, new rights and everything. They're finding out that those things were tenuous and that these same rich white folks and these same wealthy benefactors that promote somebody like Trump or some other fascist politician, and not just him, but there are others, even in the so-called Democratic Party that postures that they're different. In point of fact, all they're doing is tightening a noose around our necks and telling us we have to accept it. We have to accept it. And we only have to accept it if we do accept it and if we don't see any ability to create a different kind of change for ourselves. And the value of the 1960s, there was a lot of mistakes made and all that kind of stuff. But the fact that people stood up, even people who'd been historically oppressed, stood up. And everything that happened in 1960s, let's be clear about one thing. I don't care what somebody tells you. Everything that happened in the 1960s happened because of the Black movement, the Black protests and social change and the revolutionary movement. That's why it happened. And all these new movements that came into existence, the gay movement, the radical feminism, and all these other movements, it was in the wake of that struggle. And that was a struggle that was transforming society as a whole. Now, it could have transformed it to the degree that it could have eradicated capitalism and created a whole new social system. It didn't do it, but it made a fundamental challenge to capitalism. These people had never, ever experienced that type of threat to their existence. And so we should learn from that. We should learn the mistakes, of course, and we should learn why we got to build a certain kind of movement that power is in the hands of the people. They don't concede anything to the rich. Don't concede anything to somebody just because they're white and so forth. Don't concede anything to anybody that if it doesn't meet our interests, if it's not in our interests, not in the hands of some bourgeois element, but the interest of poor and working people. If it's not in our interest, then we should build something else. We should go a different direction. And we have to be doing that. And we saw the potential there. We saw the potential. We saw some things that were accomplished, but a lot of things weren't accomplished. And some of the things that were accomplished, because we weren't able to continue to struggle to the final extent, were subverted. Things were subverted. You know what I'm saying? And all of this is a lesson, but it's also a road, a path that we can take. So I think that's important. And I've seen it. They say that once you've seen the high road and once you've seen the possibilities, you can't unsee it. You can't unsee it. There's people who were radicalized by it, and some of those people gave up and went in a different direction after the struggle was stifled or subverted. It went a different direction. But then some of us, who I guess I'm a true believer that revolutionary social change is possible, and that we need to understand what our strengths and weaknesses are, and we need to understand that we can actually transform and build. We can finish that struggle that started in the 1960s or whatever. And it didn't just start in the 1960s, farther back than that. But I'm just saying that period is an important period for the Black struggle, for Black people to see that they could build a movement, a varied movement, varied politics, varied leaderships, and all this kind of stuff, and varied grassroots organizations on the local level, all those things. And that movement became an international movement. It went all over the world, and had an impact. It had an impact on the anti-colonial struggle that was still going on at that time. It had an impact on in the countries like the United States, ghettos, and but also in other countries, the United Kingdom, France, and other places that had significant Black populations. Not to mention in Africa itself. Uh, you hear about Steve Biko. I know you've heard of Steve Biko.
Oh yeah, definitely.
The South African revolutionary activist and leader. He and his movement were influenced by Black Power. Were influenced by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. So these ideas, they germinate and they travel all over the world, and we got to understand how to link up with, especially with our peoples. We got to be able to link up with them and build a broad-based movement. They talk about Pan-Africanism. One thing, if you read the documents related to Pan-Africanism and everything that came out, it's always related to statism and aping what the white European countries did and all that kind of stuff. And it just, to me, I was startled by how much it was not an original document. It was not a formative document that talked about some kind of Black revolutionary struggle or whatever. It was in fact just trying to fit in with the existing power structure internationally. And I think that we need to think deeper in this period, because all these things that we thought were progressive or revolutionary or whatever from the past, almost all of them have been proven to be wanting or to be something that will not meet our needs, something that will not carry us to the next level and building a new society. And so I think that's important. It really is. And if you can't change the circumstances you live under, then you are like a zombie walking around half alive and half dead. And we see Black people who have no hope, have no path to freedom, live half lives and so forth. And we've always had the ability to do something about that. We've always had that ability. It's just that we don't accept that we can't, that we don't accept that we need to build something new. We continue to think that we can just take what happened in the 60s and apply that right now. And so, well, we got a different set of circumstances right now. We got the largest prison population in the world, and ain't nobody doing nothing about it. There has not been a mass movement around it. The prisons have been the primary way that the state has dealt with us since slavery was abolished. Prisons, and in one form or another, whether it was the convict lease system or whatever, chain gangs or whatever, they've always used the prison system, penitentiaries, whatever, against us. And even though we know that, we still continue to think that somehow we need prisons in this country, that somehow we need police, that somehow the government is going to help us, the government's going to save us. The same government that put us in position to be destroyed in the first place or to be oppressed, that government is supposedly going to help us. And I think part of our thing has to be educating, political education, or what I like to call popular education, radical popular education, to transform people's thinking, as well as their circumstances, of course, but their thinking, even thinking about what's possible and what's not. We do that, and we're closer than ever to actually breaking free. We're closer to breaking free. I don't accept this idea that some people have that we're going to create a nation state on the territory of the United States while the United States exists.
Yeah.
And the reason that's not going to happen, it just makes no sense whatsoever. Any fool would know it's not possible. This government takes and oppresses every country in the world. This government this is an empire that controls every other country, or tries to, every other country in the world. And if a black nation state came in existence, it would just be a puppet state of the white government that exists already. That's all it would be. Mm-hmm. The South Africans played that trick. And it didn't work. People kept fighting for real, true liberation, but they had created some Bantustan's, they call them. And these were phony black states that they created. They didn't have any real power. They gave them some sucker money, some everything, but they didn't have any real power or any real economic vitality at all. But they used it to try to trick people, subvert people, and create a new class of collaborators. That's where we are right now. We got a class of collaborators, came about after the 60s, and these people are holding us back. They've got good jobs selling out the rest of us. And that's just one of the realities. And until we understand that, until we can understand that we need new ideas, that's the whole thing about me being an anarchist or joining with an anarchist movement. It's not so much that I accept what exists in the anarchist movement. I have grave differences and have had for years with the anarchist movement, but a new movement is coming, and that movement is going to bring new politics and deal with the black situation, because it'll be from the black situation.
I was going to say, even the way you express yourself in the book and the language, and even on this forum right now, when you're expressing yourself, it's very much, it's an open domain. It's something that has potential. There's always potentiality. There's not a static structure. And I think when you were talking in the book about Marxism, Leninism, and all these other leftist ideologies, they seem to almost be stuck in a distant time and place. And that's been a major criticism I've had. I honestly, and I bring people on the forum, just it's informational, and I don't pass judgment, but just trying to read that stuff, the dictatorship of the proletariat and all these different terminologies, when this country, over half the country has a 6th grade reading level, I think there's a level of almost impracticality about it. And the way your book is presented is easier to sort of digest, which a lot of people who would be detractors, they would just say it comes across as very much like assertive and militant in a way. But the way your book is presented is very open to the individual to be like, okay, you could implement this in pretty much any time and space, and it sort of curves the test of time, as opposed to a lot of these other ideologies that are kind of, we're referring to a certain person that had an ideology, but it almost seems like, does that even apply in this context that we're living in now? And I think that that's a very salient criticism that you make in the book, because I don't think we're thinking in those terms. We're always referring to something else that may have been revolutionary at the time, but what about now? We're talking about a completely different context.
Yeah, we are talking about a different fragment of history. right now. I mean, there's no question. That's why I said the people who tried to reorganize the Black Panther Party, there have been 25 attempts to create a Black Panther Party, and all of them have failed because they didn't deal with the material circumstances and the historical slice of time that produced the Black Panther Party then at the same in the first place. And you know, we need to understand that we don't in this period, in this at this time, we don't do community organizing. All these groups around, they don't even do community organizing. A lot of people have never even stepped in the ghetto, stepped in the inner city whatsoever, unless they're going to work somewhere. They never even stepped in the communities to talk to people, to organize something. And so therefore you can't expect that we will be able to, really implement any change if the people who are suffering from the system don't have a voice and don't have the major voice in a movement. Then you're going to continue to get these self-centered, conceited, radical propositions written out by somebody in college that never suffered a day in their life, and or somebody in high public office that that can talk the talk, but never do anything to really change the conditions of the people they represent. You got all of these contradictions, and things are getting worse and worse and worse. You got the prison system getting more and more harsh. You got poverty becoming more and more deep. You got the police becoming more and more of just a straight up death squad. And so you got the contradictions compounding each other, so that there's going to be a like Malcolm X said, there's going to be a reaction. There's going to be it's like putting things in a test tube and shaking them up, and there's going to be an explosion. And I think there's going to be an explosion, but I think the explosion has to be something that people rethink their relationship to the government and understand that they can build something new. They can build something new, that they need to be organizing to do it. It ain't going to happen all at one time. It's going to have to be progressive, over the course of time. And there's some things I did like about the Black Panther Party, but as you say, I criticized the Black Panther Party too, and I criticized SNCC for that matter. But they're products of the historical moment at that time. So we can say that whatever mistakes they made were actually based on the material circumstances they were in, material and historical circumstances they were in at that time. But they did, do some things that were, well, you can say of lasting value, but those things were, in fact, had the potential to transform the whole of society and build something new entirely, a whole new system here. We wouldn't be even having this discussion. It'd be another type of discussion, but it wouldn't be this. And so I think that it's going to happen because people have a thing about fighting for life, fighting for life, fighting to live a better life, but fighting also just to stay alive. And of course, what's happening to people being shot and killed, people starving to death, people languishing away in prison for the rest of their lives, and so on, and then their communities being underdeveloped, consciously underdeveloped, and we're living with American economic apartheid. We're dealing with that. That's what we're living with. And so I think that organizers have to think practically, and they have to understand how to relate to people, especially the communities they're from. If they can't relate to the people and the communities they're from, who can they relate to? That's the difference between an activist and an organizer. Organizers are fighting to give power and to build power in the communities where they're from or that they've been exposed to. Activists will take an issue, one issue, a number of issues, and they'll fight around that one issue. And to me, that's limited, and it just doesn't go far enough. It doesn't go far enough. One issue, whether it's just police terrorism, which is related to the actual structure and the functioning of the state, of the government. You know what I'm saying? They can't run this system without cops.
Mm-hmm.
The whole system would collapse if they didn't have cops.
You got that right.
You know, people don't quite understand that. They think that the cops are trying to help them. The cops are going to keep the bad people away. The cops are the bad people. That's the thing. They are the bad people. They are murderers. They are gangsters and stuff. You know, it's just a question of changing one's perspective and being able to make people look at things differently. And then when they start looking at things differently, then we may be able to transform circumstances we're living under. Forced to live under. Forced to live
Lorenzo, do you have time for 2 more questions and then before we conclude today?
under. I'm here, brother.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so I have 2 major questions because I think they're pretty significant parts of the book. One, there's one section you talk about tactics, and you mentioned a black tax boycott, a national rent strike, urban squatting, a boycott of American business, and a black and POC general strike. How effective would that be? And do we have the sort of capacity to do something like that in the near future? Like, what sort of time frame are we talking? Or is this something that we could be doing right now? Like, how do you see that, those types of tactics?
Well, I started talking about this stuff 20 years ago, you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying, or more. So, I mean, it clearly is a possibility.
Mm-hmm.
That has never changed. That has never wavered. Now, the thing about organizing, you know, some things, something that was a revolutionary thing, an idea, or a type of organizing back years ago, is not necessarily the same now. But then on the other hand, there are ideas that were tried back 20, 25 years ago that failed or that people didn't grab hold to that can be used in another time frame, in another crisis situation.
Mm-hmm.
And we may be in that situation. I contend we are. But we still are in, you know, like I talked about the mass imprisonment in this country. This is the largest prison establishment in the world. In fact, it's the largest prison establishment in world history. But where is the movement? Where's the movement? You know, what's happened is that it's been co-opted by intellectuals, academics, politicians, and others in the establishment. They'll feed each other. They'll write books about it, and they'll get on television, and so they'll complain about it. But their solution is that the Democrats, or whoever it is they're appealing to, whichever wing of the ruling class, should do something about this. Should do something about it. I'm talking about it, and so forth and so on. But y'all should do something about it. No, the people themselves, the communities. You know, one of the things I noticed, and I've said this over and over again, most so-called prison organizers and so-called abolitionists in this period, they don't do anything in the communities where the prisoners come from. They don't deal with the economic contradiction where these communities are made poor, made impoverished. They don't deal with the fact that so-called policing is a political tool to beat down the people with brute force and to help those in power stay in power. And they don't deal with the reality that it's the central government that has created these conditions in the first place under the disguise of fighting crime. And fighting crime leads us right on to fascism in one stage or another.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? And we're at that stage right now where we're looking at realistic, straight up fascism. You know, we got the prison system already, concentration camps already here. You know, we don't.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like Hitler had to build concentration camps. Now we got concentration camps, and we got killer cops that's capable of genocide. We got all the ingredients necessary for they could wipe us out. You know, now I don't like to talk like that necessarily because you know people think you know hysterical or something or other, or you just alarmism. But listen, if somebody runs at you with a gun and tries to kill you, and and you see him coming, and what are you going to do? You going to stand there and wait on him? But you going to hightail it out, or go down shooting or something, you know? But I'm saying we got to deal with that. We got to deal with the situation. And of course, that's just a dire description, but the issue is really dire. I mean, you know, they kill so many people, that lets you know that they are serious. A lot of these, I call them police lynchings. Police lynchings, that's what I call them.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not out there alone. They're paid by those in power, you know, and we need to recognize that. And you know, if you recognize that alone, we could make people understand that alone. Then we could begin to make people think of a different road, a different method of disbanding police. And people are starting to do that. You know, even here in Chattanooga, at a meeting the other night, somebody said that, you know, we can't keep making the same mistakes of trying to reform the police, or trying to work through the mayor or some other garbage. These people are all against us, you know, and that's a fundamental breakthrough for some people, you know, because they just think that somehow the people in power have their best interests, or at least aren't going to wipe them out, you know, but they are in the process. You know, if we don't stop them, they're in the process of wiping us out. That's what it amounts to. You know? So you have to have urgency, and you have to have crisis. Now, people don't quite understand, even well, many organizers don't understand the role of crisis in organizing and building a revolutionary movement. Without crisis, many people just go right along with the system. They'll think, oh, everything's okay. But when there's a crisis situation, or there's a threat to their lives or livelihood, then you can get action that you ordinarily wouldn't be able to get. And so I always try to tell that to, you know, young organizers, or, you know, or people in movements and stuff, so that they understand that, you know, when something is a crisis or things look bad about something, it's not always a bad thing for you in order to be able to build something new. In fact, it's a central condition, essential ingredient for organizers and for communities and those of us on the bottom to be able to rise and onward to freedom. You know,
There's one final question that I think is how could it not be relevant? Because you describe yourself in the book as a lot of different things: anti-imperialist, anti-racist, anti-libertarian socialist. You describe yourself as an anarchist, obviously, but you also describe yourself as a Black revolutionary. And so I've gotten this question a couple of times. I've thought about it. I've posed it to a few people on the forum before, and everyone probably has a different version. But I want to know, since I'm talking to you now, what does Black liberation mean to you?
I've asked myself that question. So, well, you know, it actually is supposed to mean that we are overthrowing, or have overthrown, every vestige of racial oppression and every vestige of colonial oppression, and we have restored ourselves to the state that we are a free people. That's what it's supposed to mean. And unfortunately, it's more complicated than that, because, as I said, many see the struggle itself as for, you know, gains in terms of their political position, or their professional position, or their you know, money, you know, be able to make some money, uh, sometimes directly from the predicament of Black people, other Black people. And there are people who will tell you they're revolutionaries, but believe that, you know, think like that. So every idea about freedom and about, you know, Black liberation and Black struggle is not the same. First, you have to believe in liberation. If you don't believe in liberation, just the fact that it's a so-called Black liberation doesn't mean anything. And you have to be able to point to and build a movement in opposition to those in power and who are got their foot on our neck. And so many have a vested interest to keep it the way it is now, where they just ask for some money and some political power over the mass of black people, so that they can, act as a black bourgeoisie or comprador class of petty bourgeoisie elements. There's some people want that. If you listen to some of the arguments, for instance, about reparations, many of these people want to create a black capitalist state, or they want to enrich themselves in some fashion, And some people even want to run the prison system. Some black people, so-called black nationalists, want to run the prison system, or want other forms of ability to, profit from the misery of black people under the system. And that's one of the things that we have to recognize as well. I don't support the Nation of Islam. I always have thought it was, as Malcolm said, a criminal organization. That it a cult, a dangerous cult. They killed not only him, but killed others as well, if you look at their history. And that don't stand for, revolution, or don't stand for social change, that want to work with those in power, but they want to, build their movement at the expense of the rest of us. In Chattanooga, the city government gave $1 million to the Nation of Islam, the local Nation of Islam. And they gave them that money because they're working with the police department, and as soft cops. They go out and one of their programs is to get 10,000 black people to oppose crime in Chattanooga. So the idea of splitting the black community into certain elements, allied with them, to attack and wipe out the other elements, or see to it that they go to jail, or whatever the case may be. So they're helping those in power stay in power. You know what I'm saying? And all the racial rhetoric and all the talk about the white devil, it's the garbage that you've heard for years. They're opposed to the white devil until the white devil comes with some money. If the white devil comes with some money, he's all right. They'll take it. So I mean, we got those kinds of things that are going on. They may seem discouraging, but they're typical of what happens when you're fighting for freedom. That happened in South Africa. You had certain elements that united with the enemy class, and they were collaborators. And so you're going to have that, and you have got that now. And so there are those working with the police, and they would love to have a situation where they could have us fighting each other, killing each other, an internal civil war. And that's not far-fetched at all. That's essentially what happened in South Africa and in other countries as well, where people were fighting to overthrow the imperial power, the colonial power, and you had collaborators who worked with those white forces to oppress the rest of the people. And so we got that here in America, and we need to be able to recognize it.
Well, I tell you, Mr. Ervin, you actually, something that I was not going to do originally, but I think this conversation kind of inspired it, because I work with Black writers, and I'm honestly right now I'm not even in academia. I took a break. I'm not in academia. I don't even know if I'm going to go into academia anymore. But my dissertation, the third chapter especially, talks about the idea of quilombismo, the quilombos, the self-sustaining communities in Brazil. And so I think it's interesting that we're talking now, because a lot of what is in your book kind of overlaps with what I was doing without even realizing it. And so I think because of you, I am going to, and because I've gotten this from the audience too, to Kiko, why don't you post some of your stuff on here? I've always been reluctant to doing it, but maybe there is more relevance to it than I realized before. And I think you to kind of give me the impetus to kind of, go forward with that, because I wouldn't have thought about doing it probably before, but I appreciate that. Um, do you have any final words for my audience? Again, this is a very international audience. We got different types of people in the audience, but do you have a final message or words for the people who should go read your book, Anarchism and the Black Revolution?
Well, Anarchism and the Black Revolution started out as an underground underground tome or whatever pamphlet. It was 84 pages long, and the fact that it's lasted this long, I guess as well as myself, the fact it's lasted this long and it still has fresh ideas in it that people can connect with is an important thing, But I think that education without organization is empty. It's just detached from the reality of what's happening in the streets. But I think education that attempts to, and that does transform the actual social conditions that people live under, and encourage people to read and study, but also to be willing to go out in communities and talk to people and to try to build new movements and all that. That's really all that I'm saying. All this is really all that I put forth. And I think, I'm not saying that every set of ideas are valid, but I am saying that, those of us who are willing to open our minds and to look at new ideas are important in this period where there are, like I said, there's a lack of hope and there's a dearth of intellectual and radical ideas being formulated. These are the things that are killing the struggle. One of the things I tell people all the time is that when the counterintelligence program came along, they did destroy the Black Panther Party and they destroyed SNCC and a lot of other organizations, and that was a terrible thing. But those organizations had been around long enough that they had educated a large mass of people, and it was not an easy task to destroy the ideas that people had gotten. Like the Black Panther newspaper sold 250,000, 300,000 copies a week. And the Nation of Islam sold even more. I'm not saying, I won't say anything about that, but Nation of Islam sold even more. So I'm saying ideas outlast individuals, ideas outlast people and institutions and all of that. But new ideas have to be circulated among new generations and so forth. That's really a key thing. One of the things that have killed off the Black struggle and kept it weak in this period is that the ideas that were brought about in that period, in terms of political education, in terms of radical changes and all these things, those ideas is what we have to do in terms of, well, some people call it political education. I call it popular education, radical education. We have to be able to, it's not just your ideas you're expressing. Your ideas are always based on somebody else's stuff and so forth. So, and that's the way it should be. Like like I said, to me, Martin Sashri was certainly well, it wasn't just an elder, but he was a mentor to me and others as well. And he is very much responsible for some of the ideas I used to go into Black autonomy and Black, Black anarchism and all that. A lot of those things were inspired by him. I don't say they come from him, but they were inspired by him. And so we need to think about what can we do. And if you're inspired or whatever, then you need to start thinking and writing and putting it out there. Otherwise, it's just an idea. You have to put it out there. You have to challenge yourself and then challenge other people who come up with garbage and keep us in slavery, mental slavery, keep us in mental slavery as well as physical slavery, of course. We have to challenge these people. We have to challenge the status quo, the idea that nothing can change. Nothing can change because, everybody thinks like this, everybody does this. No, you break away and become something different and you influence other people. Like when I started doing this stuff with anarchism, nobody paid any attention except, the people in the anarchist movement to some degree. But other people thought, it was just so weird to see a black person saying he was an anarchist. And then at my age was, I was older than a lot of these young white kids that, had, they built a culture around anarchism. My thing was, I don't want to build a culture around anarchism. I'm trying to build a movement that can transform the conditions of life, and not just my lifestyle or livelihood. No, I'm not trying to just transform. I'm trying to change life, trying to save life, by building something new, whole new society. That's what I'm trying to say. And it's going to vary. People have different ideas, and there's no one person, no one idea that can have everything encapsulated. But you got to have sometimes somebody to be a pole of attraction, so that people will become interested. Just like you become interested in what I wrote. I didn't know you. You didn't know me before. You knew things about me before I knew about you. And and I think we also got to stay in touch with each other and help to build institutions that raise the new ideas we're talking about, raise them and build a whole new political tendency, radical tendency, build a whole different kind of political study, and all of that. You know what I'm saying? And that's how things change. I mean, that's how you can get to the stage, at least, where you can build revolutionary community organizers. And for me, the first step is to try to build a black anarchist tendency. Building that first, and then a lot of things become possible as a result of that. So that I'm very happy I was on here with you. Like you, I was kind of taken aback at your personality and the kind of person you are, and so I had a different idea and so forth. And I had met Jay. I physically met him, but we talked some years ago and everything. And then when I had heard about you, I said, Kiko, what is Kiko? Who is Kiko? I didn't know what was going on. So it's a surprise and a pleasant surprise for me to be in your presence and to hear your ideas as well. And your questions have been very, very right on, and to the point. And when you're doing interviews, you want to bring out the best in the person. You want to bring out the ideas and the views of that person that you might not get ordinarily if you don't ask a question or it doesn't open the door for them to speak. I haven't had a lot of opportunities lately to do this speaking for years, so it's a wonderful thing. Well, brother, I got to get out of here now.
Yes,
and
I just had one more thing.
I'm honored to have been here. And we need to find a way to stay in touch with each other because I'm always doing things, and also I wanted to hook up later on and tell you about the book project and all the other stuff I'm doing. So I think it's just an important meeting as a whole, but I got to get out of here.
Yes, I just have one final thing. Is that if an audience member had a question or a comment, is there any way they could get in touch with you? Or are you comfortable leaving an email or anything?
Yeah, I've got an email at komboa 2 at gmail.com. It's KOMBOA, that's small letters, KOMBOA 2 at number 2 at gmail.com. And also I have a Facebook page, and they can go there and hook up. Gotta go.
Okay, thank you so much, beautiful people. This was a wonderful episode 58, and I can't wait to publish it, and we'll talk soon. We'll keep in touch for sure. Right. Cheers.
Yeah, that's what we need to do. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Love and struggle.